guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk through the first section of how to do animation in Clip Studio Paint. Animation in Clip Studio can be daunting because a lot of the tools and stuff are hidden in menus. So we need to open a few things before we can get started. The first thing we're going to work on is opening up the timeline and setting our new animation project preferences. To open up Clip Studio's animation timeline, we need to go to Window and then Timeline. You should see a little timeline like this that shows up either at the bottom or on the side of your workspace. You can always rearrange these to wherever works the best for you. I like mine at the bottom, and then I also like to have my windows locked height and position so that I don't end up moving it around accidentally. To open a new animation project, we're going to click on File, New, and then the animation project icon looks like this. You're going to have some different restrictions depending on if you have Clip Studio EX or Clip Studio Pro. Clip Studio Pro will allow you to do animation, but you only get 24 frames. So if you're animating in 12 frames a second, that gives you 2 full seconds of animation, and you can also save the files and layer them together. So you could do second 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6, and then just stack those up in a video editing software. If you're paying for the little bit of an expansion with Clip Studio EX, you get unlimited animation as far as your PC or your iPad will allow. For animations, I'm typically using a canvas of 2000 by 2000 by 300 resolution or a 1920 by 1080 by 300 resolution. I like to have a little bit of slush on the edges of my canvas that I know isn't going to be part of the animation so that I can work as far out as I need to. It's the same concept when I do static emotes. I just want a little bit of extra space to sketch in. Sometimes I use that space for palette swatches and making notes to myself. For the bigger canvas, I do 500 on all of the edges. You can see that you can add as much space as you'd like right here in the blank space section. For the 2000 by 2000 canvas, I typically just do like 200 on each edge, and that gives me enough space. I end up working normally in a frame rate of 12 frames per second. You can do 24, but you have to do a lot of extra work that way, and it doesn't read, it reads really smooth, but it doesn't read quite so handmade, which is something that I really like about my animation work. Apart from the size of the canvas, the blank space, and the frame rate, I don't do a ton of editing in this menu. Just go ahead and click OK and let that canvas open. You can see when the canvas opens that now we've got a few things within the timeline section. We've got a blank animation folder, and then we've got our paper background that's normal for Clip Studio Paint. So now that we've got some things within the timeline, we can go ahead and test the play, the looping, and the skip to end and beginning functions that are here. The play button just acts like you would expect. Skip to end and beginning, those are also the same. Those little buttons in between the play and the skips are the jump to last frame, so you can kind of use those to navigate through your frames if you'd like to. I don't ever really use those. I kind of will just move the red slider with my stylus. You can see here that it set us at 12 frames, so you can drag out the little blue tab and then those tracks as well to get it all the way to 24 if you only have Pro. And then if you have EX, drag it out as far as you need it. It's better to have more space than you need because it's kind of a pain in the ass to drag those back in. If you end up not using as much space as you have taken up, you can just drag just the blue tab in to shorten your animation. It will only play back that section. This little repeat button allows the animation to loop, so when you play it back, it will just continue to loop it until you tell it to pause. This is really helpful for if you're trying to do a looping animation of some kind, like a GIF or a Instagram sticker or an alert, something that's going to loop back on itself. It's also really easy for testing your walk cycles and bounce cycles and stuff, especially if they end up looping back around. A few of the other little buttons here, we've got a new animation folder button that will open a brand new animation folder that's empty. We've got the new frame button and then the link frame button. So you do the new frame button to add frames to your animation folder. You do the link button to add in a new instance of an existing frame. One of the most important things I figured out with Clip Studio Animation is if you go into a new animation folder, you've got a frame in the timeline, so that's like a little white box on the timeline down there in the folder. You'll see a corresponding layer in the layer menu. If you delete just the layer in the layer menu, click New Folder, and then new layer right after new folder, it will start you out with frames that are a layered folder instead of just a single layer. So this allows you to do a sketch, a line art, additional sketches, and color and multiply and stuff all in the same folder. So if you then add a keyframe movement or something, or a keyframe opacity on top of this animation folder, the cells will be affected in the same way, and you don't end up having to copy keyframes or do a bunch of jury rigging to get all of the like color and shadow and layers and stuff if you've done those in different animation folders to line up correctly. So you can see now when we go back to our timeline and we click new frame, when we open our layers, it's automatically added a folder with a layer in it. It will mimic whatever is in the first frame. So if in the first frame you had a sketch and a line art and a color and a highlight layer, it will give you that many blank layers when you click frame 2. This basically means that if you've got an object that's not changing shape or moving at all, it just needs to be physically like moved to another location, or you've got part of your drawing that is continuing throughout the animation, like it's a background piece or a prop or something that's not going to be moving or changing shape. This makes it really easy to just copy those line art layers and color layers over to a new frame. That gives us a lot of efficiency we can add to the process without having to rework a lot of things. One of the core things with any animation software is the onion skin feature, which Clip Studio has. So there's a little button for onion skin right here. I'm gonna go ahead and demo just really quick how you would use that in animation if you've never seen that used before. This is how people add little animations of words that kind of do like a little shake, or they have little like sparkles and stuff like that. Super easy, like the very basics of animation, and a great place to start if you've never tried it before. So we're gonna write our word, and then we're gonna go ahead and add a new frame, turn on our onion skin, and then basically trace it, but not exactly. And that will kind of give us this funny little shaking effect where it looks like it's moving a little bit. There's a lot of different things you can do with the timing and with the stylization of this. Adding polka dots or little fireworks or sparkly effects and stuff like that. The sparkle effects I'll show you how to do later in the animation big demo. There's some customization you can do with the onion skins if you need it. You go to show animation cells and then onion skin settings to edit those. You can show how many animation cells before or after the cell that you're working on you'd like to see, what the opacity settings are like, and what the colors are if you'd like to change any of that. I think I've changed mine on my PC, but these are the stock ones on my iPad. Once we have these frames added, we can replicate them in a few different ways. One, we can drag in the blue tab and we can just have these 2 frames loop over and over again. We can export it like that and it will totally work. If you wanted to add any variety towards the end of the animation or make it like a little bit longer, we can go ahead and use the batch editing tool to do that here. We go up to animation, then edit track, and select batch specify cells. The settings for these can be a little bit tricky to get the hang of. I would recommend just playing with it a couple of times and undoing if you didn't get it quite the way you wanted it until you get it just the way you want. Another way we could go about this is just manually link the frames over and over again until we've met the number of frames we want to cover. So you just do link frame select 1, link frame select 2, link frame select 1, go back and forth until you've got it all filled in the way you want it, and then you can kind of add more frames and stuff, move them around just by tapping and dragging on them. We're gonna go ahead and move on to a bigger demo of how to use these tools. I wanted to show you guys sort of what the process looks like when you run through it on something kind of small. So we're gonna do this little terrarium animation together. Right now I'm just doing this sketch. This really helps me get centered on the animation. I don't always do a full animatic, but I sometimes will just start from a regular sketch. Sometimes those will be copied over from my digital sketchbook, or they'll just be sort of something I whip out right at the beginning. You could even do these as a photo from a paper sketch if you wanted. If I have specific requirements that I'm trying to hit, if it's an animation for a client, I will typically do an animatic ahead of time so that the client can approve the movement. I'm gonna do a whole episode of the series about how to make an animatic and how to use that to make your animation smoother and look a little nicer, a little more polished, and get the movements correct. We're not gonna do one for today's demo, but we'll go over that in the future for sure. The next step is to run through in your mind what parts of the drawing you want to animate, what's going to be moving, and how you want to make that happen. This comes with experience a little bit. You will be able to recognize more what needs to be a frame-by-frame action and what can be interpolated with keyframes. Really quick, we should probably define frame-by-frame versus keyframe. So frame-by-frame would be I'm drawing an image and then I'm going to the next frame and I'm using onion skins to basically draw the action manually by hand from one frame to another. And then interpolation would be I'm using a keyframe movement, so I'm using a keyframe at the beginning of the movement and at the end of the movement, and then I'm using tools to move the drawing in between those, whether you're free transforming it or scaling or moving it. And then those keyframes will do a smooth motion in between the 2 points. Clip Studio Paint has tools for both types of animation here. My preferred method is to hybridize both into the same animations when I can. Once we've got sort of the idea of what we want to be moving and what we're animating down, we're going to create the animation folders and the regular layers that we need to be able to do that. You can use keyframes, whether it's opacity, movement, skewing, or scaling. You can use keyframe interpolation on regular layers and also regular layer folders as well. So you don't necessarily have to have it inside of an animation folder for it to be animated. Once we have everything set up, we're going to go ahead and do the line art for everything that we want to be still. We're going to separate out anything we want to be animated. As I go through this process, you'll see that I'm going to put the little leafy skull flowers on a different layer than I will the terrarium and the terrarium foliage. I did this specifically because I want the little leaves to kind of sway a little bit when the ghost moves. And I know I can do that really easily with interpolation and just kind of skewing them just a tiny bit. Now we're going to go ahead and do the frame-by-frame animation for the ghost. I'm making sure to watch this back a bunch of times to test the animation as I'm going along so that I know the animation's working, that it's looking smooth enough. You can go ahead and do frame-by-frame keyframes by drawing the first position, the last position, and then cutting the difference a couple of times. I just did straight ahead frame-by-frame animation for this. So start at the beginning, animate out until you hit the stopping point. Once I finish the line art for the ghost's movement, I want to end the animation with a fade out to 0% opacity so the ghost disappears. This will make it so I don't have to manually loop, like he doesn't have to reverse and go back into the terrarium, he can just disappear. So I'm going to select the whole animation folder that contains the ghost's movement. I'm going to scrub to the point I want the ghost to start disappearing and then enable the keyframes. Then I scrub to where I want the effect to end and tap the plus to expand the keyframe menu for the folder. Select opacity and then go to the layers menu and change the opacity to where you want it. In this case, I'm backing it all the way down to 0. You can see I kind of messed up the keyframes and had to go back and fix them. Later on when I have everything colored, I decided I wanted it to fade in a bit as well. So I repeated these steps for the beginning of the ghost's movement. Because of the folders in each frame, it's really easy to fix things like this and have it affect all of the layers in the frame. So now we're going to add colors to the line art the same way you would normally add colors and multiply layers and stuff in Clip Studio Paint. Because of the folder structure, we're just going to make a new layer and put it under our line art, and then you can go ahead and fill in your flats like you normally would. You can also add any effect layers you want to do at this point. So a multiply layer for shadows, a hard light layer for lighting on top, highlights, anything you want, you just stack those in the layers. We're going to go ahead and color the rest of the terrarium now. I did a little bit of layering of some transparent layers for the glass effect. I think I made these like a light blue, but I probably should have gone for a green. I don't know. I wanted like a little bit of contrast because everything in here is green. Here I decided that I wanted the ghost to be coming out from inside the terrarium, so I removed the terrarium layer folders from the animation folder and made it a normal layer folder instead. And then that way I can move the ghost animation in between those layers. To make the skullflower plants move, we're going to make them a file object. This gets a little bit complicated and kind of squirrely, but I think it works, and I've done it multiple times on different animations, and it seems to work the same every time for me. So first you want to save your document and make sure it's in a folder that you're okay storing it in. If you move the file object after we save it, it will break the animation and you'll have to redo it. Hopefully Clip Studio will fix this in a later version, but I have not had a lot of luck reattaching them once they're broken, even though that option exists within the software. The first step is we want to get everything on one layer. I'm going to select out the little skulls from my flats layer and then any highlights and stuff that I have on other layers, and then I'm going to combine that all with the line art and just make sure that everything is just on one layer for these little guys. Then I'm going to tap and hold or right click on the layer and then select File Object, then Convert Layer to File Object. It's going to ask you to save the file object. I try to save them in the same location that my clip file is in, so that they're together at least, even though you can't move them. Once it's saved, go into your layers. You'll see two matching layers now, but one will be an object. Hide the original one, and then select the object layer and the object tool from your subtools. Go into the tool properties and make sure that under mode, you have free transform selected. This is going to let us not only scale and rotate, but also skew things with the object tool. Before you enable the keyframes, skew one of the corners of this object space just a little bit. I have tried multiple times to get this to work without doing this step, and every time it locks me into scaling. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to frame 1 because that's where I want my movement to start, and then I'm going to use the keyframe button to turn on the keyframe interpolation. This sets your current position as the first keyframe. Scrub along the timeline until you get to the spot where you want the movement to end, and use the object tool nodes to move, skew, scale, or rotate the object until it's in the final position that you want. You can then repeat these steps as many times as you need to get a bunch of different motions. Now you can see when we play this back, the little leaves are moving. If you needed to adjust the keyframe positions, you can tap and drag them just like you can the frames. The last thing that I want to do for this little animation is add some sparkles around the terrarium. To do this, I made a new animation folder and drew in some shapes, just some little like stars and dots and stuff. And then I'm going to add another frame, and I use the onion skin to change the shapes out, but I keep them in the same position. Then I go ahead and repeat this a couple more times and then link the frames out to the end of the animation, and we have some little sparkles. That's the end of animation part 1. Next time we're going to go over onion skin versus light table, which is an amazing tool that Clip Studio has that we didn't really cover today, but is super, super helpful for animation, especially frame by frame. And the next one after that should be animatics and how to use those, and we'll just kind of go from there. I hope you guys enjoyed this and you were able to pick up some cool tricks. If you're looking for more content like this, check out my video on setting up your Clip Studio workspace, using correction layers in Clip Studio Paint, and improving your line art. You can support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing here on YouTube. You can also support me in my projects over on Patreon. This video is brought to you by my amazing patrons, Jesse C., Anthony Jetts, Terrorbilly Jean, and Tuna. Thank you guys so much for your support.